I urge all my colleagues to support this legislation. I yield back the balance of my time.
Reserve.
Gentlelady reserves, and I'll recognize the gentleman from New Jersey.
Mr. Speaker, I yield 2 minutes now to the Speaker Emeritus, Ms. Pelosi.
The gentlewoman is recognized.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I thank the gentleman for yielding and for his leadership on this very important issue, and I thank the distinguished chairwoman of the Energy and Commerce Committee and associate myself with her remarks, as well as with Mr. Pallone's. I thank Mr. Christian Murphy and Mr. Gallagher, Chairman Gallagher of the Select Committee on China, for their great leadership, bringing this legislation forward to the Committee of Jurisdiction, legislative jurisdiction. Mr. Chair, I have a few points to make, and it's interesting to hear this respectful debate. First of all, this is not a ban on TikTok. I'm a grandmother of teenagers. I understand the entertainment value, the educational value, the communication value, the business value for some business on this. This is not an attempt to ban TikTok. It's an attempt to make TikTok better. Tic-tac-toe, a winner, a winner. And here's what I have to say. The people of China have come forth. The Tibetans have come forth and said on TikTok in China, they are suppressed. They cannot put their message out. Not only that, the Chinese government misrepresents the situation in Tibet. In Hong Kong, well, let me just tell you about Hong Kong. During the Taiwan election, TikTok into Taiwan that the Uyghurs, on whom there is a genocide exercised by the Chinese government, they have told the people in Taiwan that the Uyghurs like that genocide. And they told them that the people of Hong Kong like the destruction of their democracy. They don't frame it that way, but that's their message. And again, suppressing the communication from Tibet. And then just people, yesterday on the steps, we heard from the Taiwan people, we heard from the Tibetans, we heard from the Hong Kong, and we heard from a woman whose husband was arrested because of his communication with somebody with a shared view. So this is controlled by the Chinese Communist government. But forgetting that, if you can, I can't, think of this.
Lady's time has expired.
The Chinese government will control the algorithm. They can change it any time.
Does the
coming
gentleman
into the
from
United
New Jersey
States.
wish to allocate
I urge
more time?
a yes vote. Thank you.
Gentleman from New Jersey reserves, and I'll recognize a gentleman from Kentucky.
I recognize my friend and fellow colleague on Judiciary Committee, Mr. Bishop from North Carolina, for 4 minutes.
Gentleman's recognized for 4 minutes.
Mr. Speaker, this is not the first time that restricting speech has been pursued in the interest of national security. In fact, in 5 days' time, next Monday, I'll go to the Supreme Court for the first time I've attended an oral argument in the case of Murphy versus Missouri, the case where agents from the White House and the Department of Justice and other federal agencies embedded themselves with American social media companies to manipulate what could appear on social media, expression by the American people. Described by the lower court as the most massive attack on free speech in U.S. history. And even as that pens for a decision by the Supreme Court, Congress would, in this legislation, say, in effect, hold my beer. I don't use TikTok. I think it's ill-advised to do so. Members of this body are famous on TikTok, and I think that's unwise. But I respect the choices of 170 million users in the United States. In the Trump administration attempted to ban TikTok in 2020, and it was held that it couldn't do so in 2 court decisions because under the International Emergency Economic Powers Act are subject to the Berman Amendment, passed in 1988 by this body to provide that in the interest of dealing with hostile foreign powers, the president can do all sorts of things with respect to commerce, but cannot ban the free flow of information across international boundaries. I've heard that described as a gap in the law, but it's a feature, sir. It's not a bug. This change cannot be, this legislation cannot be described as other than receding from the Berman Amendment and that principle in American law, which does not, by the way, did not emerge from the brow of Representative Berman in 1988, but was predicated on a much earlier principle of First Amendment law established in 1965 by the United States Supreme Court in the case Lamont versus Postmaster General, which said the American people have a First Amendment right of access to foreign propaganda. At first, it may be remarkable or strike one as odd to hear that, but that's because the proper relationship between government and citizen in the United States is that the citizen decides what to be exposed to and what ideologies to embrace and consider, and is always free to engage in expression, including across international boundaries. That remains the prevailing constitutional law today, and it begs this question. How could it be that Congress should be working hard to devise a means to circumvent that principle, that prevailing principle of the First Amendment against the use of a particular means of expression by 170 million Americans? And isn't it ironic that the technical advisors in the construction of this legislation to design it so that it can get around legislation challenges, including isolating litigation challenges to 180 days and only in the Court of Appeals of the District of Columbia? Those technical advisors are the same folks at the Department of Justice who devised that plan to embed agents of the Department of Justice and other federal agencies with social media platforms in the United States to restrict what Americans could say online. Mr. Speaker, America confronts a grave challenge in China, and it will not prevail by becoming more like it. I yield.
The gentleman from Kentucky reserves. I now recognize the gentlewoman from Washington.
Mr. Speaker, I yield 30 seconds to the gentleman from Kentucky, Mr. Guthrie.
The gentleman from Kentucky is recognized
Thank you,
for
Mr.
30
Speaker.
seconds.
I want to emphasize this bill does not ban TikTok. It simply would require the Chinese Communist Party affiliated ByteDance to sell TikTok and divest their interests. I was asked, does this just affect TikTok? And no, it's any foreign adversary or any app that is owned, controlled, or unduly influenced by any foreign adversary. We must protect our national security and help keep America's private data out of the hands of our foreign adversaries. I urge support of this bill, and I yield back.
I reserve.
The gentlewoman reserves, and I'll recognize the gentleman from New Jersey.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'll yield 2 minutes now to the gentlewoman from California, Ms. Eshoo, a member of the committee.
The gentlewoman is recognized for 2 minutes.
I thank the ranking member of the Energy and Commerce Committee. And, Mr. Speaker, I rise today in support of H.R. 7521, the Protecting Americans from Foreign Adversary-Controlled Applications Act. This bill will ensure the divestiture of TikTok from its People's Republic of China-controlled parent company, ByteDance. And why is it essential for Congress to do this? Because the PRC controls ByteDance, and this presents a serious national security threat to our country. TikTok has 170 million plus U.S. users, and it collects tremendous amounts of sensitive data. They also collect substantial background data that may be proprietary, which may only be available to TikTok. The national security law of the PRC requires all Chinese organizations to, quote, support, assist, and cooperate with national intelligence efforts. Under this law, ByteDance could be compelled by the Chinese government to provide data on every American TikTok user. They can weaponize this data to exploit and manipulate Americans through surveillance and disinformation. This legislation separates TikTok's data, algorithms, and source code from ByteDance. And importantly, this bill does not ban TikTok, something I do not support. I support divestiture because our first and most important responsibility as members of Congress is to defend our Constitution and defend the United States of America. The bill would also give Americans secure ownership of their data, including posts, photos, and videos, and give this administration and future administrations the authority to respond to future national security threats. For all these reasons, I urge all colleagues to vote for this legislation in the name of our national security.
The gentleman from New Jersey's time has expired. I now recognize the gentleman from Kentucky.
I yield 4 minutes to my good friend from Georgia, Miss Marjorie Taylor Greene.
The representative is recognized for 4 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise today as the only member of Congress that has ever been banned by social media. On January 2nd of 2022, Twitter banned me, banned my personal account on which I was campaigning for Congress, raising money, and using my free speech to inform the voters in my district they can vote for me. This was not by a company owned by China. This was by American-owned Twitter. This came on the heels of our own United States government working with big tech and working with social media companies to censor and ban Americans' free speech. I believe that this bill can cause future problems. It's opening Pandora's box, and I'm opposed to this bill. Most Americans don't trust the United States government because of our experience dealing with it. Never forget that the United States government also was the one that provided the Russia hoax to Americans. It also worked to ban Americans' free speech. It also has worked in so many ways to illegally, warrantless spy on Americans through FISA. If we wanted to be serious about stopping a foreign adversary, if we wanted to be serious about stopping China, we would stop China from buying our U.S. farmland. We would raise up our American energy independence. We would also stop the Green New Deal and not rely on China, who owns and operates 85% of the battery market worldwide. There are dangers that lie ahead in this. This is really about controlling Americans' data. And if we cared about Americans' data, then we would stop the sale of Americans' data universally, not just with China. There's some further issues. This is a Pandora's box. What's to stop Congress or the United States government in the future from forcing the sale of another social media company claiming that it's protecting Americans' data from foreign adversaries? I think we could see in the future another Russia, 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 and possibly force the sale of X, as many members in this body claim that Elon Musk is altering the algorithms of X. By the way, it was Elon Musk's purchase of X that restored my social media account on Twitter and allowed me to have my free speech back on Twitter. There's also members of this body, the Democrats are claiming that election meddling can happen on social media. Well, we can never forget Mark Zuckerberg and Facebook. We can never forget the election meddling that happened there. And by the way, American-owned Facebook and Instagram is where most of the garbage, like the gender lies and the woke lies, exist. Many Americans and many teenagers believe awful things, and they don't just see them on TikTok, they see them on Facebook and Instagram too. I don't think this will accomplish what the goal is to accomplish. So there's other concerns, I think, here, is that when the government moves into forcing the sale of TikTok, who is going to buy it? That's the question that we should be asking. Who is going to buy it? Who will be the next to control the data of over 170 million Americans? Are we going to trust Mark Zuckerberg to control their data? I certainly don't. By the way, most of the time, my posts on Facebook are shadow banned, and I certainly don't have the reach on that social media account. I think that there's many other ways to protect data, and I think this body is capable of it if we choose to.
The gentlelady's time has expired.
I oppose the bill. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The gentleman from Kentucky reserves. I recognize the gentle lady from Washington.
Mr. Speaker, I yield 1.5 minutes to the gentleman from Texas, Mr. Roy.
The gentleman from Kentucky is recognized. From Texas is recognized for 1.5 minutes.
I thank the Speaker. We are in a Cold War with China, and some of my colleagues want to ignore this fact. We have legislation before us that is 12 pages long. The bill is not a ban. It forces foreign adversaries, including Chinese communists, to divest. The bill is not a bill of attainder. It's prospective, not retrospective. The bill does not violate the First Amendment. It focuses on conduct, not content. It requires both being controlled by a foreign adversary and conduct that itself is espionage. If you just had one alone, it might be debatable, as the gentleman from North Carolina or Senator Paul note, in that it might protect Americans' rights to seek out and obtain foreign propaganda. But again, that is not this case, because we have, and have as a trigger in the bill, demonstrated national security conduct harm. To be clear, we've properly taken action at the device layer by banning Huawei and ZTE spy gear. We've taken action at the carrier level, prohibiting China Mobile and China Telecom from connecting to our networks based on a determination they are controlled by the CCP and a national security threat. We now need to take action at the application level when malign CCP control has been demonstrated, lest we render meaningless our past actions to protect the United States of America. We should ban Chi-Com ownership of our farmland or drug manufacturing, but we should fight them here and ban the foreign ownership and control of American data and stop apologizing for the Chinese communists. I yield back.
I reserve.
The gentlewoman from Washington reserves, and I'll recognize the gentleman from Kentucky.
I yield 1 minute to my friend on the other side of the aisle, Mr. Garcia from California.
Gentleman's recognized for 1 minute.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I have enormous respect for the efforts of my colleagues to focus on security and data protection, and I share many of their concerns. But I disagree with this approach and bill that could impact 170 million Americans who use TikTok. 1/3 of all U.S. adults use the app, and millions of entrepreneurs and small business owners use the platform to support their family. And yes, just like every other social media platform, there is misinformation and privacy concerns on TikTok, and I share those. However, it's important that we don't treat TikTok differently than other platforms. If we're going to address this issue, we've got to take the same approach to all social media platforms. We can't just single out one. Now, I join many of my colleagues and the ACLU in voicing concern over the freedom of expression. Now, I'm a strong supporter of ensuring that TikTok remains an open marketplace, and there's no guarantee in this bill that there won't be an interruption of service that could lead to an end of this app. I don't think we fully appreciate the impact this is going to have, and for that, I'm a strong no. Thank you, and I yield back.
Gentleman from Kentucky reserves. I recognize the gentlewoman from Washington.
Mr. Speaker, I yield 30 seconds to the gentleman from Indiana, Dr. Bouchon.
The gentleman is recognized for 30 seconds.
Mr. Speaker, one of the most important duties of the Constitution assigned to Congress is to protect the American people and to safeguard our national security. After hearing from national security experts last week, it is clear the prolific use of media platforms controlled by the Chinese Communist Party and other foreign adversaries poses a danger to our country. I am grateful to my bipartisan colleagues for moving this legislation, showing we will take action to protect the American people, their personal data, and security from foreign interference and manipulation. We took an oath to do so. Thank you, and I yield back.
The gentle lady reserves. I now recognize the gentleman from Kentucky.
I now yield 1 minute to my friend on the other side of the aisle from California, Ms. Kamlager Dove.
The gentle lady is recognized for 1 minute.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise today to oppose H.R. 7521. Banning TikTok is an insufficient Band-Aid solution to the genuine national security concerns the app raises and exposes. The bill seriously undermines civil liberties by essentially banning a platform that 150 million Americans use to engage in free speech and expression. A statewide TikTok ban has already been paused by a federal judge on First Amendment grounds. Even without TikTok, the PRC could still be able to conduct influence operations on other social media platforms and obtain sensitive U.S. user data through hacking or data brokers. Finally, this bill would greatly expand the executive's authority to ban tech companies with zero congressional oversight. I cannot sign a blank check to some future president who would easily and dangerously weaponize this legislation to profit and silence. Creatives, artists, content creators, and businesses in my district will get caught in the crossfire of this bill and deserve better than federal overreach as a substitute for a thoughtful and incisive solution
Ladies, time
to this
has expired.
complicated national security challenge. Thank you. I yield back.
Reserve.
Gentleman from Kentucky reserves. I recognize the gentlewoman from Washington.
Mr. Speaker, I yield 40 seconds to the gentlewoman from Iowa, Ms. Henson.
The lady's recognized for 40 seconds.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise today in support of this simple bill. It forces TikTok to cut ties with the CCP or lose American users. The day after we introduced our bill, TikTok went into panic mode. They lied to their users, saying Congress was going to ban TikTok, using young kids as political pawns. TikTok's growth stunt proved our point. What if on Election Day, TikTok sent out an alert saying our elections were canceled? We must act now. Today, we're sending a message to the CCP that we are going to deflate the 140 million spy balloons that they have installed on American phones. We must act and pass this bill today. Thank you. I yield back.
The gentlelady reserves. I now recognize the gentleman from Kentucky.
Reserve.
Gentleman from Kentucky reserves. I now recognize the gentlelady from Washington.
1 second. We have Kamek coming for 1 minute. Okay.
Mr. Speaker, I'm pleased to yield 1 minute to the gentlewoman from Florida, Ms. Kamek.
The gentlelady from Florida is recognized for 1 minute.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Today we take a stand against the Chinese Communist Party and their efforts to turn content creators in America into foot soldiers for the CCP. You know, we aren't banning a company, as the high-paid lobbyist for ByteDance, which is owned by China, would lead you to believe. We aren't infringing on constitutionally protected speech or growing the size of government. All we're saying is break up with the Chinese Communist Party. As a constitutional conservative, I don't want my government or big tech to have unfettered access to my private data. So why in the hell would we want and allow the Chinese Communist Party to have access to our private data? The CCP is an adversary of the United States, and this legislation narrowly, thoughtfully, and directly addresses the national security threat and protecting Americans' data and, by extension, their First Amendment rights. Because let us not pretend for 1 second that TikTok is not infringing on our amendment, our First Amendment rights. I would say that this bill, as Representative Roy from Texas said, this bill is about conduct, not content.
Gentlelady's time has expired.
Conduct, not content. And there is no restriction mentioned on content in this bill.
The gentlelady's time has
but
expired.
I will mention,
Does the
Mr. Speaker, I
gentlelady
will
from Washington
mention
reserve?
that the espionage is not covered or protected as one of the 5 tenets of
gentlelady
the
is no
First
longer
Amendment.
recognized. The gentlewoman from Washington, you have 1 minute and 3/4 time left, and I now recognize the gentleman from Kentucky.
Right there. I'd like to now yield 1 minute to my good friend from Arizona, Mr. Schweikert.
The gentleman is recognized for 1 minute.
And thank you, Mr. Speaker Pro Tem, and to my friends. I actually am about to try to make everyone mad. Yay! I actually believe data is a private property right. It belongs to you as an American citizen. The problem with our design here, it's really well-meaning, but it doesn't get at the structural problem. So you have an entity over here, they divest. What makes them not then take the data, sell it to a data broker, and it gets washed and ends up still in the bad actor's hands? You got to understand, there's even articles out this week of even our own 3-letter agencies buying their data now from data brokers instead of doing the tracking. We need to think dramatically more globally. Your data is a private property right. That will be the only way we end up protecting ourselves from bad actors and sometimes even our own
time has
selves.
expired.
And with that, I yield back.
The gentleman from Kentucky reserves, I believe he has 3 minutes, 3.5 minutes available. And I'll recognize the gentlewoman from Washington.
Mr. Speaker, I yield 30 seconds to the gentleman from Michigan, Mr. Wahlberg.
Gentleman is recognized for 30 seconds.
Mr. Speaker, last March, when I asked about America's data being stored on and accessed by China, TikTok CEO stated under oath that it was not accessible by the CCP. However, this statement was a lie. As her own internal recording said, everything is seen in China. H.R. 7521 gives TikTok and similar apps 6 months to divest from their parent company, ByteDance. It's their choice. TikTok needs to decide whether they value their users or their ties to the Chinese Communist Party more. Simple as that. Vote for this bill. I yield back.
The gentleman yields, and the gentle lady from Washington yields, reserves. Gentleman from Kentucky will be recognized.
I reserve.
The gentleman from Kentucky reserves, and I'll recognize the gentle lady from Washington.
I reserve.
Gentle lady from Washington reserves.
Is the gentlelady prepared to close?
Prepared to close.
You have no other speakers?
I have one more speaker, and we'd like to close. So I'm going to wait. I'm going to reserve until you are ready to, until your time has expired. Are you prepared to close?
I'm prepared to close.
Okay.
If the gentlelady has no further speakers.
The gentle lady from Washington has the right to close.
Yes.
Okay. All right.
I'd like to close.
The gentleman from Kentucky is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I know the other side is sincere, and we've not questioned that here today, and I won't question their sincerity. In fact, I think they've identified at least 3 problems that we have in America: moral decay of our society, invasion of Americans' privacy, and our competitiveness with China. But in this case, their cure is worse than the diseases. You know, there are ways to get at these root problems. We just haven't taken it upon ourselves to address those root problems with actual legislative solutions that have been put forth here in Congress. For instance, Mr. Warren Davidson's The Fourth Amendment is Not for Sale Act would put a strong stake in the ground to protect Americans' privacy, whether it's from our own government or some foreign governments. That is the kind of thing we need. We need warrants in the FISA program. Our government shouldn't be able to spy on Americans without a warrant, yet they are. Let's bring that to the floor and vote on it. These are the kind of cures we need, not the bill that's offered here today. The bill that's offered here today, even though I know it's offered genuinely, it could also be named the Facebook Protection and Enhancement Act, because it's not the American people who are going to benefit most from this. It will be Facebook. Their stock is going to go up if this bill should pass the Senate. Now, what are some ways that we could improve this bill? Well, it should at least have a sunset. I mean, that's the only reason we're able to debate whether FISA should have warrants in it, because it sunsets. And what have we observed? FISA's been abused. That's my concern with this TikTok ban. It will be abused. If it's just banning TikTok and ByteDance and copies of that, why does it need to be 13 pages long? And I know they say it doesn't ban it, it forces divestiture of the company. This sounds like when American companies try to do business in third world countries and a dictator says, well, you can do business here, you just got to give me your company, and now you can continue to do business. We wouldn't let another country take over Ford Motor Company for selling Ford cars in their country, yet that's what we're wanting to do here. And again, you know, this is a cure that is worse than the disease. Who's going to be prosecuted by this bill? Is it ByteDance or TikTok? Will they be taken to court? No. I mean, they're the target of this, but how do you elicit or effect a ban on them? By prosecuting Americans. The only way you can ban TikTok and the other companies from being here is to say what this bill says, which is we will bring civil action, the government will bring a civil action suit against you if you so much as host them here. If you have an app store that allows them to be here, you are an American or an American company and you will be the target of this bill. Those are the only people who can be pursued under this bill. And I know it's in order to go after TikTok, or so they say. Well, I would just close by saying that, you know, we're sitting here with phones made in China, We're wearing suits made in China. We drove cars here with chips that are made in China. And they're our foreign adversary. And by golly, we're going to do something about it. What are we going to do? We're going to tell Americans they can't put a piece of software on their computer. They can't go to certain websites that the president designates. So I urge my colleagues to oppose this well-intentioned bill because it will have bad consequences, and I yield back the balance of my time.
The gentleman yields back the balance of his time, and I'll recognize the gentlelady from Washington.
Mr. Speaker, I yield as such time as remains to the gentleman from Texas, Mr. Crenshaw.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The gentleman has 1 minute and 15 seconds.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I want to address all of my colleagues who I think are confused about the First Amendment, confused about the nature of TikTok, and confused about the intentions of the Chinese Communist Party. Let me explain this really simple. TikTok is owned by ByteDance. ByteDance is in China, and when you're in China, you have to do whatever the Chinese Communist Party says you have to do. That's according to the National Intelligence Law passed in 2017. If they want you to spy for them, you will spy for them. That's how that works. They have a board member from the Chinese Communist Party on ByteDance. You wouldn't allow a radio tower owned by the Chinese to be put up right in the middle of Washington, D.C., and then allow it to just put out Chinese propaganda. You'd probably complain about that. That's exactly what TikTok can be used for, because millions of Americans are addicted to it. They see it, and the Chinese can absolutely manipulate those algorithms. The First Amendment does not give the Chinese Communist Party the right to American data or the right to manipulate the minds of Americans. That would be a really weird interpretation of the First Amendment. The primary counterarguments to this bill seem to be as shallow as, well, it doesn't do everything I want, and Facebook's really mean, and I don't want them to make money. So what, then that means you owe Chinese access to all of our data and access to manipulate the minds of Americans? I don't think so. This is a very specific bill, very specifically tailored. It does not harm American companies or American individuals. You know it. You got to read it. Pass this bill. And I yield back.
All time for debate is completed. The question is, will the House suspend the rules and pass the bill H.R. 7521 as amended? Those in favor say aye. Those opposed, no. In the opinion of the chair, 2/3 being in the affirmative.
Mr. Speaker.
What purpose does the gentleman from Kentucky rise?
I request the yeas and nays.
The gentleman from Kentucky requests the yeas and nays. Those favoring a vote by the yeas and nays will rise. A sufficient number having risen, the yeas and nays are ordered. Members will record their votes by electronic device. This is a 15-minute vote.
Called Huawei, which had similar concerns about because it was Chinese owned, if the Chinese government would be able to access data. And ultimately that effectively has been banned in the U.S. and a lot of other countries. But TikTok's really different, Diane, because it is used by so many people. There are these free speech questions that aren't the same as some of those other companies where we've seen export controls and other restrictions. And so this does really open up the can of worms. And will there be legal challenges to any sort of restrictions that go in place, as we've seen in other states like Montana that have bans and in other previous attempts by the federal government to ban it too?
And we're looking live now at the House floor with that vote, where that vote is now underway. If this bill passes, it could lead to a ban of TikTok in the U.S. It, of course, would have to go to the Senate and would have to go to the president's desk. But Selena, the president has already said that if it makes it to his desk, he will sign it. Former President Trump has spoken out against a ban on TikTok. So how does this all play out politically, Selena?
Yeah, Diane, I mean, this is a hugely influential platform. Politicians want to use it to reach young voters, and the Biden campaign knows that those young voters are going to be critical for this election, and many of them are already frustrated about the president's handling of the war in Israel and Gaza. So yesterday, I point blank asked the White House press secretary, why is the president's campaign using this platform if the president is so concerned about those national security issues? Now, the U.S. has said this isn't a national security issue, right? They're worried about the ownership, but until it's actually banned, we're going to see this campaign continue to use it as a way to reach all of those young voters, Diane. And now the Chinese government, for their part, the U.S. says that this is not a ban, but that they want to have that sale happen. But the Chinese government, they're likely not going to allow that sale because they're going to have to approve it. And they updated their export laws after Donald Trump tried to ban it back in 2020 to say that these sensitive critical algorithms, like the one that underpins TikTok, cannot be exported or sold. So it's going to be a long road ahead on this.
It's expected to pass the House today, but could face some more hurdles in the Senate, particularly because former President Trump has come out against this ban. So, Elizabeth, what are we looking in terms of the political landscape and the appetite for this bill?
Right, and even if this does pass with strong bipartisan support in the House, as it looks like it could, and really it was a very unanimous vote in the committee that kind of set this up to where we are today, the Senate's been a little more lukewarm about this, Diane. There's been previous kind of more targeted attempts at legislation in the Senate. One of the concerns that we've heard is that this just singles out an individual company. That's unusual in legislation. Usually there would be a more broad approach looking at some of these safety concerns, looking at the questions that are trying to be addressed with data sharing, but not looking at just one name specifically. So really, we don't know where it goes from here. Does it get more broad support in the Senate? Does the Senate kind of stall this bill, hold it up in committee so that it loses some of the momentum? That's what we're going to be looking at after this House vote today.
And, Mike, one of the reasons former President Trump said he's against this ban is he says that this would drive more people to Facebook, to Meta, the parent company of Facebook and Instagram, and that he's more worried about that company. What do you make of that argument?
I think that's a really strong argument to be made because, as I'm mentioning, Diane, and what Elizabeth just pointed to as well, is that this Congress is focusing on just a singular company, but there's so many other concerns that we have when it comes to these tech platforms and when it comes to like social media. In particular, I'm thinking about X, formerly known as Twitter. When Elon Musk took over X, formerly known as Twitter, he eliminated most of the content moderation that would address a lot of the issues and national security concerns that the federal government and the FBI has going forward. Since then, the new CEO, when she testified before Congress, she said that she is now increasing the content moderation department and putting them in Austin, Texas, to really focus on this. But if we don't look at these other companies like Meta and like Facebook, we're still going to see misinformation campaigns that are going to go on. We're still going to see potentially our adversaries still able to reach the American public through these platforms into data. And so when we look just so singularly just at TikTok, we really are missing the concerns of national security and also to the ways that artificial intelligence could have interference on our campaign. And so we can get ahead of this if we're proactive and looking at the larger picture, but just be so singular focused, we're really missing the mark. And Diane, really, we're missing the mark on what the American public wants. And what the American public wants is to make sure their data is protected and is not shared, not just with adversaries, to which is kind of an esoteric way of thinking for the average American, but really in everything they opt into, whether signing up for a new gym membership, whether it's signing up for a new, purchasing something online through Amazon, right? And so we want to make sure that our data is protected. And so we're really missing the mark on what Americans are asking for. So Congress has to be able to walk and chew gum at the same time, protect our national security, but also to do the things that Americans are asking for. It is time for them to pass a federal legislation on data privacy.
And Mick, I want to get your take on that same issue. From a national security perspective, how do you view this focus on TikTok versus on all of these social media apps and anything else where we sacrifice our data privacy?
So Mike, as usual, is right. There is a lot of issues with the other platforms, but that's primarily because our adversaries use it to essentially cause political and civil turmoil in the United States. They create groups that don't exist, that gives the people the impression that they do. They do a lot of things to manipulate the United States population because, quite frankly, we're a free and open and democratic society, and it's easy to do that through these social media platforms. I think what sets TikTok a bit apart is because the data apparently, if you listen to the lawmakers who have access to this information, goes back to the Chinese Communist Party. They essentially own it. And I think one of the requirements so this wouldn't happen would be that TikTok sever its relationship with the Chinese Communist Party. Perhaps if that would have been done to the satisfaction of the national security community, this wouldn't happen. But I do think this is broader than TikTok. It does include platforms that can manipulate the public, that this one also includes data, personal data, that's going back for some purpose with the Chinese Communist Party. I think that adds an additional concern by national security professionals and obviously now lawmakers.
And again, that vote's happening right now on Capitol Hill. We've got 95 yay votes so far, 15 nays for this bill that could lead to a ban on TikTok. Our Rachel Scott is there on Capitol Hill. Rachel, what are you seeing there as this vote's underway?
Oh, that was you. That was me. Yeah, strong bipartisan support for this already so far. And this is following a very fiery sort of House debate on this legislation. On one end, you had former Speaker of the House, Nancy Pelosi, trying to make it clear that they're not trying to ban TikTok. What they're trying to do is force the sale of TikTok, that they don't want it to be owned by its Chinese parent company, ByteDance. On the other end, you had Congressman Massey making the case that, yes, you know, they're all standing in the House chamber. Many of them are wearing clothes that were made in China. They drove cars here that had chips that were made in China, and then raising this question, well, why exactly are you trying to ban this app when there's already so much Chinese influence that is happening on American society already? But still, you've heard from so many lawmakers pushing these concerns about whether or not the information, the algorithm, user data, the location is being shared with the Chinese government, and that's the paramount concern. So this bill overall looking to put ByteDance in a bind to send a strong message to TikTok. The big question is after it clears the House, which it is expected to do, what happens in the Senate? Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer has not made any commitments to putting this bill on the floor, even though the president says he would sign this into law if it hits his desk, Diane.
All right, Rachel Scott, Selena Wang, Elizabeth Schelsey, Mick Mulroy, and Mike Muse. Thank you all. We, of course, will be following. nationwide ban of TikTok, and right now it looks like that bill has the votes to pass. Lawmakers have been sounding the alarm about TikTok's Chinese parent company ByteDance, warning that the app could allow the Chinese government access to the data of millions of Americans, like browsing history and location. Government officials also say they have growing concerns China could be influencing what users see on the app. ABC News senior White House correspondent Selena Wang joins me now, along with ABC News' Jay O'Brien on Capitol Hill. Elizabeth Schulze is here with me in studio, and ABC News contributor, Google Tech Policy Fellow Mike Muse. Jay, you're right there on Capitol Hill. Talk to me about this. What's the latest?
Yeah, you said it yourself that this looks on track to pass. They needed a 2/3 majority with the way that they brought this vote to pass it. If everybody shows up and everybody's voting, and we're still waiting to work out exactly if everybody did show up to work today, that would require 290 to pass. But as you saw on the screen there, they are well past 290 votes. They're 300 plus votes. So this, again, looks on track to pass. We have to wait for the vote to gavel out to officially say that, because you can always change your vote in the House of Representatives up until the last minute. But as you're seeing on your screen, this had broad bipartisan support from both Republicans and from Democrats, who expressed concerns about TikTok's ties through its parent company to the Chinese government. This legislation, remember, Diane, while we say it could lead to a ban of TikTok, what the text of the legislation says is it aims to force a sale of TikTok away from that parent company in China, ByteDance, within 6 months if the legislation passes. Then, only then, if the legislation became law and TikTok wasn't sold from ByteDance within that 6-month period, then it could be banned on app stores and from web hosting companies and things of that nature. So the legislation on paper aims to force a sale of the app. If it passes here in the House today, which it is on track to do, it's still got to pass the Senate before it becomes law, and it's looking like it's going to have a much rockier path in the Senate.
Mike, I know you have some concerns about this bill, so what's your reaction to hearing that it's on track to pass right now?
Yeah, I have a lot of concerns about this bill. My main concern, Diane, is that I don't think that Congress is addressing the root cause of what this is by singularly focusing just on TikTok. I believe that Congress should take a more comprehensive approach to looking at all the social media platforms like Meta and like Google and like Facebook to really, and X, formerly known as Twitter, to address the issue, one, of content moderation, to ensure that these companies are doing what they are able to do to make sure that the content moderation is in place to alleviate really what the concerns of Congress actually is. The second thing that I have concerned about is that this doesn't address the overall data potential breaches that could occur across multiple platforms because Congress has yet to pass any federal legislation that addresses data privacy protections for Americans across the board. We still lag behind Europe, who has already passed legislation for their data privacy. The third thing I think that this doesn't address too as well is the role that artificial intelligence plays to what the FBI is concerned is in terms of like misinformation campaigns. The fact that Congress has yet to fully address artificial intelligence in a meaningful, substantive way is a huge concern of mine too as well. Again, Diane, we're falling behind Europe that's already passed AI legislation to prevent the things that the Congress really wants to. The other thing, as I wrap, is that I really believe that Congress should really look at Project Texas, where TikTok's data is currently working with Oracle to store their Americans' data on the cloud. I think that is where their concerns could be addressed, and to make sure that there's stiff regulations and triggers and monitoring to ensure that China does not have access to our data. But one thing is for sure is that our adversaries can have access to us in multiple forms, whether it's Nest, whether it's in our smart cars, whether it's in so many video-based technologies that we already use. And so the fear of cyber interference is already here, Diane, in so many other products. And so just focusing just on TikTok really takes our eye off the ball from the grand scheme of things.
All right, so that's what's missing from the bill. Elizabeth, what's in it? What are the national security concerns and other concerns lawmakers are trying to address here?
Right, what lawmakers point to is the fact that TikTok's owned by a Chinese company, and the fact is that in China, business is a little bit different, and there are laws there that could force companies to share data with the government. So the risk is that TikTok is forced to share Americans' personal data with the Chinese government. You also have concerns and questions about if TikTok could use the platform to manipulate users, spread propaganda, and misinformation. That's something we've heard about not just with TikTok, but other tech platforms too. So what this legislation would do, if this sale doesn't go through, is it would make TikTok unavailable on app stores, so like the Apple App Store or Google Play, and then that would be a problem because you wouldn't be able to update the app over time. It probably wouldn't work. It also wouldn't be available on web hosting services, so that means if you go to a website, you probably couldn't go to TikTok. This would take time to go into effect. As Jay pointed out, it still would need to pass the Senate, but I do think it's worth pointing out, and you look on your screen, you look at that vote, there is overwhelming bipartisan support for this because we have seen these concerns about national security raised at the highest levels of government, not just in the Biden administration, but in the previous Trump administration too. This is something that administration officials have pointed to, not just with TikTok, but with other Chinese-owned apps too.
So, Selena, what kind of a precedent could this set for other foreign-owned apps?
Well, look, Diane, this is not the only Chinese app that is influential in the U.S. TikTok is just one. Well, actually, ByteDance is another one that's in the top list for free apps downloaded on the App Store. It is called CapCut. In addition to that, there's a massive fashion giant, Shein. There's also the marketplace that's owned by a Chinese company, Temu. So the question really here is, if the concern is about data, about Chinese control, where does it end? Does it fall to all of these other apps as well? That would have huge shockwaves across the industry. And I think Mike made some really important points there about when we talk about these national security risks, there are many ways for foreign adversaries to collect that data. And all of these social media platforms, they all collect similar data. The data that ByteDance collects through TikTok is not all that different from what Facebook, Instagram is collecting either. So this doesn't address the really sweeping issues at hand here. But to set this into context, this is really part of a years-long effort from the United States to try and separate out some technology flows and try and stop some of that sensitive data transfers. We've seen the Biden administration take very strong approaches on limiting exports of sensitive data around chips and artificial intelligence. So it's really set into this broader context of U.S.-China tensions as well.
Jay, bipartisan authors of this bill say lobbying efforts actually backfired here. So can you explain how that worked and what the next steps are now?
Well, TikTok has mounted an aggressive lobbying effort against this legislation. Frankly, they've done that before. Remember, think back to last year when there were those multiple pieces of bipartisan legislation, each of which aimed at TikTok and regulating it in some way. All of those petered out. And one of the reasons why is TikTok mounted an aggressive lobbying operation in D.C. They put up ads in the D.C. metro system. They had influencers come to Capitol Hill and talk to lawmakers and talk to reporters. And then, of course, those efforts peter out, and then this bill comes out just about a few weeks ago and gets this groundswell of bipartisan support and starts to move through Congress very quickly, and TikTok reignites that lobbying effort. They sent a notification out at least twice, by my count, to users of the app that allowed them to put in their zip code. It would identify who their member of the House of Representatives was and give them the option to just click a button and call that member's office. And we heard from lawmakers and their staff who were getting this deluge of calls, thousands of calls, a lot of them from young people saying that they did not want this app banned. I talked to staff who said some of those young people were very detailed in the nuance of what this legislation said, and some didn't even know why they were calling. And so there were members of Congress that used that as an example of saying, look how powerful TikTok is. Look at the support that it has. Look how it is able to send out a push notification and mount those thousands of calls to members of Congress, with some people thinking that this legislation was an outright ban, despite the fact that that's not what's written in the text of the legislation. So that's where some lawmakers said that this effort may have backfired in getting more bipartisan support behind this application, because lawmakers saw, as they said, the power that this app does have.
Jay, we're now getting word that bill has officially passed the House, so it will now head to the Senate, where it could face some more hurdles. But again, that bill has...
Is the microphone on? The House will be in order. Members, please take your conversations to the rear or the side gallery. The chair will now entertain requests for 1-minute speeches. For what purpose does the gentlewoman from Arizona seek recognition?
I ask unanimous consent to address the House for 1 minute.
Without objection, the gentlewoman is recognized for 1 minute.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise today to recognize someone whose service will be felt by future generations of Arizonans. Arizona Senate President Warren Peterson. Senator Peterson's service to the people of Arizona began in 2012 when he was elected to the Arizona House of Representatives. Throughout his time in the House, he served as chairman of the Judiciary Committee and Majority Leader. Once his time in the House came to an end, Senator Peterson was elected to the Arizona Senate, where he became president in 2023. Under his leadership, Arizona has accomplished school choice, passed tax cuts for families across the state, and worked hard to enforce border security in the face of opposition from the left. During my own time in the Arizona House of Representatives, I was lucky enough to serve alongside President Peterson, where he was a respected colleague and a friend. Peterson's service to Arizona could not be overstated, and his leadership is appreciated by all Arizonans. Thank you, and I yield back.
For what purpose does the gentleman from New Jersey seek recognition?
Ask unanimous consent to address the House for 1 minute, revise and extend my remarks.
Without objection, the gentleman is recognized for 1 minute. Gentlemen, suspend. The House will be in order. Please take your conversations to the rear or the side galleries. Gentlemen, proceed.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I rise today to celebrate the Eagle Scout project of Michael Costeria. Michael Costeria is a Boy Scout from Union, New Jersey, and he wanted to upgrade the almost 300-year-old Caldwell Parsonage. The Caldwell Parsonage was the home of the Reverend James Caldwell, a strong Patriot supporter during the American Revolution. The original Caldwell Parsonage was burned by Loyalist mobs in 1780. Later that year, Caldwell's wife, Hannah, was killed by British soldiers during the Battle of Connecticut Farms. The current Caldwell Parsonage was built in 1782 and added to the National Registry of Historic Places in 1982. Michael Costeria wanted to preserve that history for his Eagle Scout project. So he researched various artifacts in the parsonage, and he created more accurate exhibit labels for each of the items found. Congratulations, Michael. You have made a valuable contribution to the historic location in this country's great fight in the Revolution. And with that, I yield back.
For what purpose does the gentleman from Tennessee seek recognition?
I ask unanimous consent to address the House for 1 minute and to revise and extend my remarks.
Without objection, the gentleman is recognized for 1 minute.
Mr. Speaker, prices for everyday goods continued to climb due to the economic policies of the Biden administration. The latest Consumer Price Index report was up 3.2% from last year. I rise in support of hardworking families I represent in Tennessee who are making hard choices to stay afloat. If they're having to tighten their belts, the federal government should do the same. President Biden's answer is to raise taxes even more, but we don't have a revenue problem. We have, in Washington, a spending problem. In fiscal year 2022, the federal government collected $850 billion more in tax revenue than the year before. Yet the federal government spent $1.4 trillion more than we brought in. Last year, the federal government spent $1.7 trillion more than it collected. That's just one of many reasons why I am opposed to the president's $7.3 trillion budget. We cannot continue spending more money that we don't have. Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I yield back.
For what purpose does the gentlewoman from Ohio seek recognition?
Mr. Speaker, I request unanimous consent to address the House and to extend concise remarks.
Without objection, the gentlewoman is recognized for 1 minute.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Today I rise to recognize the Rotary Club of Barberton as Ohio's 13th Congressional District Champion of the Week. The Rotary Club of Barberton has been a staple in the city of Barberton for over 100 years, providing life-changing services and investing in the community and its members. The first formal meeting was held on February 13th, 1924 in the People's Bank Clubs under the leadership of M.S. Yoder and U.L. Light, and was formally chartered on February 29th of that year. The club has hosts community building events throughout the year, such as speech and debate tournaments and organizing volunteers within the community to clean up trash around the streets of Barberton. And the club has continued to support students through scholarships, not only in Barberton, but in neighboring communities by providing them more than $5,000 in scholarships each year. The Rotarians of the Rotary Club of Barberton are dedicated to ensuring the community of Barberton is clean, safe, and secure, and they're unwavering on their goal of helping members of Ohio's 13th Congressional District better themselves and their cities. Again, congratulations to the Rotary Club of Barberton for 100 years of service to our community and being named as Ohio's 13th Congressional District Champion of the Week. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I yield back.
For what purpose does the gentleman from Georgia seek recognition?
Ask unanimous consent to address the House for 1 minute and to revise and extend my remarks.
Without objection, the gentleman is recognized for 1 minute.
Mr. Speaker, I rise today in celebration of the 200th anniversary of Savannah, Georgia's annual St. Patrick's Day Parade. Public recognition of St. Patrick's Day in Savannah can be traced back to 1824, when the local paper of the Georgian published an invitation encouraging all to attend the parade. From then, the ceremony has grown to one of the largest in the nation, drawing in locals and tourists alike to celebrate coastal Georgia's Irish heritage. With great entertainment, including marching bands, traditional dancers, and decorated floats, the festival is filled with fun for all ages and encourages community fellowship between families and friends. I would like to extend a special thank you to those responsible for making this celebration happen. The St. Patrick's Day Parade Committee, the Chatham County Sheriff's Office, local government agencies, and the City of Savannah work diligently year after year to make this a very special day. The parade is one that many Savannahans, including myself, hold close to our hearts. I look forward to the opportunity to witness and participate